Just after midnight, a man in Balbriggan, Ireland, called emergency services, claiming that his wife had fallen down the stairs and was not breathing. When paramedics arrived, they found 27-year-old Mary Gough lying at the bottom of the stairs, covered with a duvet. Her husband, Colin, stood nearby, stating that he had tried to help her. However, right away, something felt off. Mary's body was cold, too cold for someone who had just fallen. Her injuries did not align with what one would expect from a fall, and Colin appeared unnaturally calm. What truly happened to Mary Gough would shock everyone and unveil a disturbing plan that had been set in motion long before that fateful night. Balbriggan, a quiet coastal town in Ireland, was where the Gough family built their life. Marie and James Gough were proud parents to 6 children, 5 boys and 1 cherished daughter, Mary. Born on December 22, 1973, Mary was not just the youngest girl in the family, she was its heart. Especially close to her father, Mary grew up as the quintessential daddy's girl, loved deeply by both her parents. They were not wealthy, but they never went without. Their modest working-class life was filled with the things that mattered most: love, unity, and resilience. Mary's upbringing reflected that balance. She was not a difficult child. In fact, she was a joy, friendly, reliable, and easy to be around. She thrived socially and earned the affection of nearly everyone who knew her. Although intelligent, Mary had little interest in formal academics, viewing many school subjects as impractical, and never fully dedicated herself to her studies. However, in 1989, tragedy struck the Gough family. James Gough, Mary's beloved father, died suddenly when Mary was just 15. The loss was devastating, blanketing the household in grief. Yet, even amidst heartbreak, Mary displayed extraordinary maturity. Her mother and brothers remembered her as their pillar of strength during those dark months. Recognizing the financial strain left by her father's death, Mary stepped up, finding a weekend job to help her mother. By 1991, after finishing school at 18, Mary began working full-time as a bartender, setting aside any plans for further education to focus on earning money and helping her family stay afloat. Life settled into a simple, steady rhythm: work, home, and time with friends. But in 1993, that rhythm changed when Mary met Colin Wheel, a regular at the bar where she worked. 2 years older and recovering from a leg injury, Colin often lingered at the bar. Their conversations began casually, but something about him intrigued Mary from the start. Colin came from a similarly large, humble background in a nearby town. He was charismatic, intelligent, and quick-witted traits that made him popular in every circle he moved through. Having pursued his passion for technology, he graduated from college and secured a solid job as a computer analyst. Organized, driven, and thoughtful, Colin seemed to have it all figured out. Initially, their conversations did not seem romantic. Colin appeared to see Mary strictly as a friend. They spoke often, and she became someone he confided in. Their quiet friendship deepened with each encounter. Over time, Colin became a regular figure in her social life, attending parties with her and getting to know her circle of friends. Despite their closeness, months passed before Colin made his feelings clear. Mary, quietly nursing her hopes, never pressured him. Then, at last, Colin asked her out. One date led to another, and slowly, a romance began to bloom. Soon enough, they were introducing each other to their families. Mary's mother took to Colin immediately. He was polite, respectful, and clearly adored Mary. Her brothers welcomed him as if he were one of their own. Likewise, Colin's parents appreciated Mary's warmth and authenticity. Their relationship impressed everyone around them. Colin stood out as an ideal partner, responsible, ambitious, and dependable. He had his own car, a stable income, and savings everything needed for a secure future. To Mary's family and friends, it was clear that marriage was only a matter of time. Mary, too, was hopeful. She dreamed of the moment Colin would propose, imagining a future filled with love, stability, and shared dreams. It was the next natural step in what seemed like a carefully built life together, one she had always quietly longed for. But behind every perfect picture, shadows can lurk. Nearly 2 years into their relationship, without warning, Colin ended things with Mary. He offered no reasons, no explanations, And no dramatic argument, just a cold, clear decision that Mary never saw coming. She begged for clarity, even silently, but Colin provided none. His silence spoke volumes, yet told her nothing. The pain of that ambiguity was brutal. Mary spiraled inward, isolating herself, barely leaving home, and questioning everything. What had she done? Was it something she said, or something she didn't do? The night before he ended things, Mary had gone out with friends. Colin had tried to reach her at home, but she wasn't there. That detail began to haunt her. Was that the reason? Had she spent too much time with others? Was she being punished for enjoying herself? Even her mother, who had always seen Colin as part of the family, couldn't understand the sudden breakup. She called him, hoping for honesty, but Colin was distant, nearly hostile. He offered no explanation, coldly stating that it wasn't his fault Mary was like that. Mary had no choice but to grieve the relationship and begin again. Slowly, painfully, she did. As time passed, she found strength in focusing on herself. Opportunities began to appear. She landed a job working on the film set of Rob Roy, where her natural ability to organize and coordinate stood out immediately. People admired her. She was efficient, focused, and pleasant to work with. So much so that she was offered another job on an upcoming project in Scotland. But Mary declined. Despite the offer being a clear sign of her professional growth, she chose to stay close to home. Maybe it was family, maybe it was comfort, or perhaps somewhere deep down, she wasn't ready to close the chapter with Colin completely. And fate, it seems, wasn't finished with them either. 6 months after their breakup, they crossed paths again. There were no dramatic declarations, but the connection was unmistakable. The pull was still there, and they both felt it. This time, it was different. They approached the relationship with renewed clarity. If they were going to do this again, it had to be serious. From the beginning, they talked about the future not as a distant hope, but as a concrete plan. Mary found new stability, taking a job as a secretary at a law firm, where she once again impressed colleagues with her precision and efficiency. It was a role that fit her, allowing her to channel her strengths. Colin's own path was also steady. His work was thriving, and in 1997, he purchased a house from his grandfather. The couple moved in together, seemingly settling into the life they had once imagined. From the outside, things looked promising. They had careers, a home, and a renewed relationship. The natural next step was marriage, and Mary waited with quiet anticipation for the moment Colin would propose. But before that milestone could arrive, an event would cast a long, dark shadow over their lives. In 1998, Colin made a terrible decision. He got behind the wheel while under the influence and crashed into a neighbor's car, killing the 61-year-old woman in the passenger seat. Her husband survived, as did Colin, both physically unharmed, but the consequences were irreversible. Surprisingly, Colin wasn't charged with driving under the influence. Although initially investigated, the final verdict handed down was a conviction for careless driving. Colin paid a fine and walked away a free man. Throughout the ordeal, Mary stood by him, insisting Colin was a good man and that the accident wasn't who he was. However, there were troubling signs. Colin showed little remorse and blamed wet road conditions, avoiding any personal accountability for the woman's death. To some, that denial was unsettling. Later that year, while on vacation in the Canary Islands, Colin proposed. The moment, like much of Colin's life, seemed thoroughly premeditated. The ring, the setting, it was all planned. When they began to organize the wedding, that same level of control continued, with every detail carefully arranged. On September 9, 2000, the couple married in what should have been a beautiful and joyful ceremony. But not everyone saw happiness on Mary's face that day. Despite the flawless decorations and well-structured event, a quiet sadness seemed to follow her. During the exchange of vows, Mary suddenly broke down in tears, rushing away from the altar and running to the car. It was a moment that left the room in stunned silence. Her bridesmaids hurried after her, offering comfort and trying to calm her. Some guests assumed it was simply the overwhelming emotion of the day, possibly triggered by the absence of her father, whose death years earlier had left a profound mark on her. Others weren't so sure. Mary never explained what had caused her outburst, and after some time, the ceremony continued as planned. Following the wedding, Mary and Colin departed for a honeymoon across Asia, a trip Colin had planned with his usual meticulousness. But when they returned home, those closest to Mary noticed subtle but significant changes. She became more withdrawn, dressing in a conservative, modest style that was out of character for her. The stylish, confident woman who had always expressed herself through bold choices now seemed to be shrinking into herself. She stopped spending time with friends and rarely went out unless Colin was with her. It appeared as though her life had narrowed, revolving entirely around her husband. Her mother picked up on the change immediately. Mary looked sad, troubled in ways she wouldn't or couldn't verbalize, and Colin had changed too. The man who once treated her with warmth now spoke to her coldly, like a stranger. The shift was stark. Something had happened between them, her mother suspected, perhaps during the honeymoon. But Mary never shared the truth. Weeks passed, then months, but Mary's quiet distress never lifted. Then, just 6 months after the wedding, on March 1, 2001, at exactly 12:16 a.m., emergency services received a call from the Whelan home. It was Colin. His voice was calm as he told the dispatcher that his wife had fallen down the stairs and wasn't breathing. The dispatcher instructed him to perform CPR. Colin claimed he did. An ambulance was dispatched immediately. When paramedics arrived, they found Mary at the bottom of the staircase, but the scene was troubling from the very start. A duvet had been placed over her body, which Colin explained was an attempt to keep her warm. Yet, she was lying in a position that was far too tidy for someone who had suffered a fall, arms straight, legs together, body neatly arranged. It looked less like an accident and more like a setup. The position alone made proper CPR nearly impossible, raising doubts about whether Colin had made any effort to resuscitate her at all. Additionally, her body was unusually cold for someone who had supposedly just fallen. Paramedics found this strange. Meanwhile, Colin stood nearby, repeating the same question again and again. Is she alive? His tone was emotionless, almost robotic. One paramedic later described it as unsettling, off-key for a man who had just found his wife lifeless at the bottom of a staircase. Despite their efforts, the medical team could not revive her. At the hospital, 27-year-old Mary Gough was officially declared dead. Colin arrived shortly after, having followed the ambulance in his car. He was asked to identify her body. Witnesses noted that he didn't flinch. He showed no signs of grief, no tears, no sorrow. It was as if he were looking at a stranger. Hospital staff, accustomed to seeing families in distress, immediately sensed that something was very wrong. Then they noticed the scratches. While Colin was signing documents, a nurse observed fresh wounds on his torso, deep, red, and unmistakably defensive in nature. He quickly attempted to cover them up after realizing they had been seen. This discovery was reported to the police. If she had just fallen, why were these injuries present? Why was she already so cold? And why had Colin acted so strangely from the very beginning? Police were brought in immediately. Colin told them that February 28 had been just another regular day. He and Mary had both gone to work, then attended a homeopathy appointment together. Mary had enrolled in a course on healthy living. Afterward, he claimed they spent the evening as they normally would. According to him, just after midnight on March 1, 2001, he had been watching television downstairs when he suddenly heard a loud noise, a crash from the staircase. He said he rushed to find Mary at the bottom of the stairs, unresponsive. Her sleeve was torn, which he claimed had happened during the fall. But his story quickly began to unravel. During questioning, detectives confronted Colin about the deep scratches on his torso. He was visibly caught off guard, clearly not expecting anyone to notice them. When asked directly, he was flustered, offering no plausible explanation. At one point, in what seemed like an attempt to deflect suspicion, he removed his shirt to show the injuries. Investigators were stunned. They were far more severe than they'd imagined. When pressed further, Colin flailed for answers, denying any kind of struggle, argument, or physical altercation. Then, almost laughably, he suggested the scratches might have come from Mary's blood during CPR, and even attempted to wipe them off in front of the officers, something that only made him look more guilty. Realizing Colin was stumbling, investigators eased off the interrogation for the moment, but the damage was done. They were now firmly convinced that Colin was lying. Mary's family, too, began to see through the facade. Colin's emotional coldness was unmistakable. Rather than make arrangements for his wife's funeral himself, he handed the task over to her grieving relatives. At the service, he played the part of the heartbroken husband, but those who had known Mary saw through the act. Soon, Colin was called back in for a second statement. This time, his version of events evolved. He now claimed that when he approached Mary, she had reached for him and scratched him, an attempt to explain the marks on his body. He added that she had just stepped out of the shower before the alleged fall, but this contradicted the medical examiner's findings, which showed no signs of recent bathing. Investigators were now certain that Colin had killed his wife, but the question remained, why? Then came the autopsy results, which shattered Colin's already fragile story. There were no injuries consistent with a fall, no broken bones, no trauma to the spine or skull, nothing that would support his narrative of a fatal staircase accident. More critically, the pathologist determined that Mary had died much earlier than Colin had claimed. Her body was already too cold at the time of the emergency call, and there were clear signs of asphyxiation. Bruising around her neck indicated she had been suffocated, likely with a soft object that left minimal marks. Later, investigators discovered a stretched bathrobe belt in the home belonging to Colin. They believed it had been used to strangle Mary. She had been alone with him in the house. There was no sign of forced entry. No one else could have done it. The pressure mounted, and detectives began examining Colin's digital trail. His home had been scrubbed clean of evidence, but his workplace computer revealed everything. Colin, ever the meticulous planner, had only deleted his browser history. What he didn't know was that his company routinely backed up employee computers. IT specialists recovered months' worth of search data. What they found was chilling. For at least 7 months, long before the wedding, Colin had been researching how to kill his wife. He had studied dozens of homicide cases. One in particular captured his attention: the case of Henry Louis Wallace, a serial killer who had strangled multiple women. Wallace would cover their bodies with warm materials to delay post-mortem cooling, throwing off the estimated time of death and giving himself an alibi. Colin had copied the method almost exactly. He suffocated Mary, covered her with a duvet, and timed the emergency call to mislead first responders. His goal was simple and heartless profit. Mary had a life insurance policy worth £200, which Colin had doubled to £400 just before her death. The payout was valid only within the first 10 years of their marriage. Time was ticking, but financial gain wasn't his only motive. His online activity also revealed frequent visits to dating websites, many for open relationships and partner swapping. He was corresponding regularly with women, one in particular standing out: Helen from England. Colin had lied to Helen, claiming to be a widower whose wife had died in a tragic car crash while Mary was still alive. He told her he was planning a move to England, even looking at rental properties. With the insurance money, he intended to start a new life. Mary was merely an obstacle. Despite the mountain of evidence, Colin still hadn't been arrested. He likely believed he was safe. But that illusion ended on April 10, 2001, when he was formally arrested and charged with murder. During interrogation, he denied everything, claiming the internet searches were just curiosity and the conversations with Helen were just for fun. But no one believed him. Colin was released on bail the next day under strict conditions. He had to surrender his passport, report to police regularly, and stay within the country. However, over the following months, his behavior shifted. He told his family he was depressed, that he missed Mary terribly, and that he had no purpose left. Then, in March 2003, Colin vanished. He had driven to Hoth, a scenic peninsula known for its cliffs, and never returned. His car was found abandoned nearby, with all his personal belongings inside. To many, it looked like a suicide, but investigators weren't convinced. Colin didn't seem like the type to end his own life. The timing felt too convenient, and they were right. 1 year later, in the summer of 2004, Colin was recognized in Mallorca, Spain, working as a bartender. He had faked his own death and assumed a false identity using the name of a former neighbor whose birth certificate he had managed to obtain. Despite his confiscated passport, he secured a new one by claiming the old one was lost. In a cruel twist, he was working at a bar called Karma and living with a new woman. As always, he was unfaithful, manipulative, and calculating. His time on the run ended in July 2004 when Spanish authorities arrested him. He was extradited back to Ireland to finally face justice. In April 2005, Colin shocked everyone again by pleading guilty. There would be no trial, no long battle in court. He was sentenced to life in prison. Today, Colin Whelan is serving his sentence at Wheatfield Prison. He reportedly works in the prison kitchen and is considered a model inmate, but his behavior behind bars cannot erase what he did. He killed Mary Gough, his wife, his partner, the woman who believed in him, and did it all for money and lust. Over 20 years have passed, and he remains behind bars with no sign of early release. Some wounds, no matter how much time passes,